marriage works when you're willing to work on your marriage, and it's having that mindset that for you to have a good marriage, you need to be willing to work at that and make the investment that you need to make it work. And if one party is doing all of that, it's just not gonna. There's gonna be a breakdown at some point.
What are the kind of character traits would you say make somebody wife material or husband material?
I think first of all, it's just.
Hello and welcome to Not Another Money Podcast. Why is it called Not Another Money Podcast, you may be wondering? It's because this is not your typical money show. Get ready for real money conversations and lessons, expert insights from some of our very special guests, and hear some really inspiring stories from everyday people. On this podcast, you're going to learn how to earn more, how to spend less, how to grow the difference, and most importantly, live your best financial life. Welcome to Not Another Money Podcast. Thank you so much for coming on today. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm really excited for today's conversation. I think there's going to be so many gems and nuggets that you're going to be able to share with our audience. But before we dive into the heart of the conversation and I ask you all the questions that everyone's dying to know, it would be good for you to, in your own words, tell us a little bit about who you are and what it is you do.
So my name's Leighton. I have a job that I work as an analyst for the NHS, but I'm also an evangelist, and an evangelist is basically a pastor who goes around to churches whenever he gets an invitation and preaches.
Amazing. And you've been an evangelist for how long now?
So 7 years in total, and then pastoring for 9 years.
Amazing. So in total, gosh, my maths, that's 16 years in total.
Yes.
You've been out on the mission field, which is amazing, incredible. And in terms of, actually, no, before we go into all of that, in terms of how long you've been married and telling us a little bit about marriage, it'll be good to do a little bit of an icebreaker with you. This is what I like to do at the start of the podcast episodes with my guests, just to like make everyone all comfortable and relaxed. So it's a game of Would You Rather. Have you played it before?
Yes.
Yes, so would you rather? So I'm going to literally give you some options and you
Yep.
just say whether you would rather A or B. So
Okay.
the first one then is, would you rather be the saver in the relationship or the spender?
Well, that's a good question. I'd rather be the saver.
Yeah, but what are you naturally?
I'm probably the spender.
I can tell by the way you answer. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. I would not have expected that. I would have thought you would have said that you were a saver. But okay, that's cool. That's good to know. Okay, so the next one then. Would you rather budget together or let your wife handle it and report back?
No, budget together, definitely.
Okay, that's a good one. All right, the next one. Would you rather save for a holiday or book it now and figure it out later?
No, save. 100%. It's what we do anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, that's an easy one, actually. Okay, so this one is a little bit more challenging, I think. Would you rather receive £1 million but have to live in the UK for the rest of your life, or 500,000 but you can live anywhere in the world?
Oh, yeah. Option 2.
Yeah.
I don't want to stay in the UK. I'm done.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, you actually came to that answer quite quickly.
Yes.
I wasn't sure which one
I
you would
didn't need to
pick.
think about that.
No, not at all.
No.
Not at all. £1 million though.
No.
No.
No, definitely not.
Get me out of here. I hear it. Okay, so the next one then. Would you rather work at your dream job making £75,000 a year, or do a boring job that you hate but you get paid $500,000 a year?
No, option 1. Money's not everything. Job satisfaction's everything.
Really? Okay.
Doing what you love.
Definitely. Okay. I think I would have to think about that one. It depends on how bad the job is that I hate.
Well, yeah. There's caveats there.
Yeah, exactly. And how long I have to do it for? Maybe a year or two, I can stomach it and then take it from there. So, okay. And then the last one then, would you rather have your rent or mortgage paid for a whole year or receive £20,000 cash?
That's a very good question. Probably option 2, because there's stuff that I need to do in the house. So I'd use that to do work on the house.
Okay, cool. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense, to be fair. I think I would go with that option too, simply because I have to pay my mortgage anyway. So that
it's going to come out.
Exactly, it's going to come out anyway. So I'm used to doing that. So getting that extra lump sum, like you said, I can find things to do with it. So I think I would agree with you on that one. Okay, brilliant. Thanks for playing.
No, thank you.
The next segment of the show, before we dive into the main heart of today's conversation then, is This is obviously Not Another Money podcast, and what I like to do is invite my guests to share not another money moment. So it's simply where you share a significant money memory or a money moment that's had some kind of an impact on your relationship with money or how you view money over the years.
I'd probably go back to my first ever job as doing paper rounds. I
Okay.
think, from a very early age, it was like mum was like, you need to get a job. And my first job was a paper round. And I remember just going from house to house, just delivering newspapers. And, you start off, the bag was really heavy, weighed so much, and you're just going around doing your rounds. But then you had a few elderly people that would kind of give you a little tip or a little bit of extra money. So I think for me, it was like that was my first real job,
Yeah.
where I had my own money that I could spend on whatever I wanted to.
Amazing. And how old was you when you did that paper round?
I was I was young. I was very young, probably definitely in my teens. So yeah,
Okay, okay. So early
13,
teens.
14, 15. I wasn't that old, yeah.
Yeah. And do you remember how much it was back then and how much you
It
was
was
paid?
it was like pounds. It wasn't a lot, you'd be given around and it was like, yeah, okay. But back then you could do a lot with that money.
Exactly. So what makes that money moment stand out for you? Is it the fact that it is your first experience of earning your own money, would you say?
Yeah, and also like the fact that you can spend it on whatever you want. There's not like if your parents give you money, it's normally because you want to buy something specific, shoes, what have you, and you're given the money to buy that. Whereas that is your own money. And we had a corner shop just down the road, so it was always going down and just buying sweets. I was a sweet lover back then. I still am actually. And it was just like, right, I can spend that on wherever I want. So it was that liberty, that freedom that money gave me.
Amazing. No, it's so cool. I've always wanted to do a paper round actually. It's one of those jobs that you heard people talk about them doing as a
Hard
child.
work.
In fact, no, I really wanted to do things like that or like delivering milk or something locally around the area. But yeah, it wasn't a thing around where I grew up anyway that I was aware of doing paper rounds. But yeah, okay, cool. Thanks for sharing that money
Yeah,
moment.
that's fine.
Brilliant. Okay, so now we're going to dive into the main heart of today's conversation. And I thought, who best to have this conversation about money and marriage with? But yourself, obviously, well, not obviously to the listeners because they don't know this, but you are an author. You've published how many books did you say?
Uh,
Eight, it
this
was?
this one is my eighth.
This is your eighth book, and it's called
Marriage Works.
Marriage Works, exactly. And you've been married for how long now?
28 years. Yeah, in
28 years.
29 in April.
Wow, you don't look old enough. 29 in April. Okay. That's amazing. That's a big milestone, especially in this day and age where relationships can be quite fickle and quite disposable. People kind of find it. So it's like people don't think marriage works anymore, which is why it's so interesting that your book is called Marriage Works, because actually if you scroll on social media or you engage in conversations with people sometime in the world, they make it seem as though marriage doesn't work and marriage is a thing of the olden days or marriage is a thing of the past. And it just doesn't work anymore because people don't hold those values. So it's so amazing that you've written a book on this topic. And I really wanted to get some wisdom from yourself and learn more about marriage and also from the angle of money, because obviously this is not another money podcast. So we definitely want to dig deeper into the area of finances and
Yeah.
relationships. But I think just to begin with, just to set the scene and let us know a little bit more about yourself. Obviously, you said you've been married for 29 years, but just talk us through, well, you can't tell us your whole 29 years worth of marriage, but just a little bit about your experience in getting married, what age you got
Yeah.
married, etc.
So I was 22, soon to turn 23. My wife at the time would have been 21, soon to turn 22. We obviously met, not obviously, but we met in church. So I came into church, I was 18 years old, and that would have been in 1992. We sort of started to get to know each other uh, the following year, so around 1993, and just spent a few years kind of working out ourselves, maturing, growing up, because we were very young at the time. And then we finally got married in 1997. And so, yeah, and we've just literally kept to those vows that we made, that decision to, sickness and in health, better for worse, there's been some storms we've had to weather. There's been issues that we've had to go through, but you know, it's what makes you stronger.
Absolutely, absolutely. Wow. So 21, 22. Sorry, you said
Yeah,
you got married at
so my wife
23.
was 21, turning 22, and I would have been
Wow.
22, turning 23. We got married in April, so my wife's birthday's May and my birthday's July. So she was
Oh,
21 when we got married and then turned 22 in May. And then
yeah,
I
yeah.
turned 23 in July. So
So how was that received from your family back then? Just out of curiosity.
no, they were very supportive. I think, because we had been dating for a while, and we had worked out a lot of the issues that were there when we were dating, so the immaturity and other things that kind of raised their head. I think they were really for it, and I think they could see how committed we were to getting married. Back then, I say back then, um, I think we were just looking at it from the perspective of, marriage is not about the day; it's about what you do thereafter. And we get so consumed and caught up in how much more money we want to spend on this and on that and on everything else that we can spend money on. I think for us it was just like, let's just get married and let's just work on that,
Yeah,
work on being
amazing.
married.
No, amazing. That's amazing. So then looking back over the last 25 years of marriage then, what would you say has changed the most about how you view marriage and your experience of it?
That's a good question. Marriage is what you make it. I think that the book is called Marriage Works because it's pretty much like a play on words, in the sense that marriage works when you're willing to work on your marriage. And it's having that mindset that for you to have a good marriage, you need to be willing to work at that and make the investment that you need to make it work. And if one party is doing all of that, it's just not gonna there's gonna be a breakdown at some point, because then it's an unequaled balance. So, if someone's doing all the giving, someone's doing all the loving, someone's doing all of this, all of that, that means that the other person's not doing any of that. And sooner or later, that's going to cause an imbalance. There's going to be disagreements, there's going to be arguments, what have you. And so for me, yeah, it's just working on marriage. And I think the more I've been married to my wife, the more it sounds weird because when you get married, you feel so in love, and you're like, oh wow, this is best decision I've ever made, which it was. But I think as I've remained married, I'm finding I love my wife even more than I did back then, which sounds weird, but yeah,
No, it doesn't sound weird at all. It actually makes so much sense because you've got so much more experience together, right? So I feel like the experiences that you go through, both good and bad, make you stronger. It makes you it shapes you and it brings you closer
exactly.
if you allow it to, because it can also have the adverse effect. But yeah.
And that's it. I think, we've had to weather some challenging situations, difficult storms, and just being able to just work through those things together collectively. It's not like, well, that's your problem or that's my problem, or it's our problem, and we need to look at how we can resolve that.
Yes, absolutely. I love that. Love what you said there. It's about teamwork kind of thing. So it's not your problem or my problem, it's our problem because we are one. So I think that viewpoint and that perspective definitely helps and is probably a key factor to sustaining a long term relationship. I think when you start having those individual ways of seeing things in relationships, so where you're just kind of coexisting as opposed to being entwined as one, I think that's when you do start facing challenges. At least that's
Oh
what
yeah.
I've observed in other relationships. Okay, cool. So then would you say marriage is easier the longer you're married, or like as the years go on you find marriage becomes easier, or do you feel like it's just different as the years go on?
I think it's a bit of both. It's easier because you've learned some lessons, but there are going to be challenges that maybe you didn't face before that are still going to have their difficulties. They're still going to involve you having to put effort in and stuff like that. But I think it's easier because you grow in knowledge, you grow in understanding, not just of yourself, but of your partner, the person that you're married to. So I've got to know my wife intimately through what we've been through, and what we've experienced. And it's kind of like that knowledge, it's just invaluable. Whenever you're going through something or whenever you're facing anything, that knowledge really does help in terms of how you react and how you respond. Whereas in the early years, you would just react and respond anyhow and not really take into consideration that because you didn't have that knowledge. So it's easier to some extent, but you're not without its challenges.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That's understandable. Okay, so then just to then touch on advice to newlyweds or new couples or people even considering getting married, and if you were sitting down with a newly married couple today, what would you tell them that they need to prioritize early on in their marriage?
Well, as Christians, we look at the Trinity of marriage. You've got the husband, the wife, and Christ. And I think, for me, it's, as a husband, am I loving Christ? and then my wife asking that same question of herself, is she loving Christ? And I think if I'm loving Christ and if she's loving Christ, Christ is naturally going to be at the center of our marriage, because it's going to happen organically. I'm loving Christ, she's loving Christ. And I think my advice to any couple is just get that right. Just love Christ, know Christ for yourself, have a personal relationship with him, yourself, and likewise, the person that you're married to. And then that way, as you're loving Christ together, Christ is automatically at the center of your marriage. It doesn't mean that you're not going to have to work things out, and you're not going to have arguments, and you're not going to have those kind of things. But at the same time, because Christ's at the center, you're going to approach them differently. Your perspective is going to be different, because it's always from that perspective of, first and foremost, I have a relationship with Christ. So how should I respond from that basis? And I'm also married to somebody who loves Christ. So how am I supposed to respond to that? And I think that for me, that's the advice that I'd give anybody.
Now, I think that's fantastic advice. And I think I'll just think, I'll probe a bit deeper then, just given another situation or scenario of maybe a couple that one of them is following Christ and the other one isn't, in terms of advice you would give them in that relationship then.
It's yeah. Do you know what? It's one of those challenges, and I think that the person that loves Christ really becomes the covering for the family or for the home. And it's just you working on that relationship, because you understand that that is going to impact how you treat them, how you love them, how you respond to them. And if it's coming from that place where you do have a relationship with Christ, then your responses and your reactions are going to be driven by that. And I think it's probably going to reduce. It's not going to get rid of differences altogether, but it's certainly going to help at navigating those and processing those and working through those. But yeah, it's a very difficult situation to be in.
No, absolutely. But I think that's brilliant advice, to be honest. Like, yeah, no, I think that's good. Show them Christ kind of thing. And then
Yeah.
over time, you can win them, right? So, yeah, no, that's good. Okay. So then, is there anything you think couples rush into without having enough conversations about when it comes to marriage?
Oh, that's good. I think, when we were dating, we pretty much talked about everything. There was stuff that we spoke about that you would probably say, well, that was a bit too soon, or that was a bit too early. But I think, once you've got to that stage where it's like, yeah, I want to spend the rest of my life with this person, and it's just about, getting engaged, getting married, and going forward, I don't think you should be afraid to talk about anything. You should just be able to have those open and honest conversations. So we spoke about having kids. We spoke about the future that we have and what we would like to do. I really felt even before I got married that there was a call of God in my life to preach. So we had those conversations. What does that look like? What if I became a pastor? What if I became an evangelist? What if I became a missionary? Those conversations. So I think for me, it's just no subject should be a taboo if you've worked out between both of you that this is the person that you want to spend the rest of your life with. I think having conversations too soon where you've not worked that out isn't good, because now you're going down the road of you're allowing your emotions and your feelings to drive the relationship, and you're creating a bond too quickly. So I think it really does come back down to that thing of, is this the person that you want to spend the rest of your life with? And if you can't answer yes to that categorically, then there's no point trying to go deeper with that person on that level where you're communicating certain things with them, because you're just going to create an emotional connection and bond with that person when you don't feel like that's the person you want to be with.
That's good. That's really good, actually. So you'd say these kind of conversations, so have conversations openly when you are courting and when you're dating, but
Yeah,
certain conversations then probably don't have them until you're very sure that this is the person that I want to move forward
yeah.
with.
Because I think there's something about having those sort of in-depth, intimate conversations with somebody that's going to naturally connect you emotionally. Even before, I mean, you've probably already connected emotionally anyway, but there's something about those conversations that are going to connect you on a more deeper level. So kids, buying a house, what have you. You're talking about things that really and truthfully, that's going to connect you more than any other conversations. And it's not to say you shouldn't have them, but I think there's a time a time and a place.
Yeah. Okay, no, that's good. That's really good advice, actually. Okay, so then going doubling down or going deeper into conversations that people should have before marriage then and how they evolve. Did you have conversations with your wife around money before you got married? And yeah, how was those conversations?
I don't think it was something that was really driving conversation. It was certainly something that we kind of spoke about in terms of what it was going to cost to get married, where we're going to go on our honeymoon, what's that going to cost, And at the time, at the age that my wife was at, she was just finishing her degree. So when we got married, she was actually doing her dissertation and then finished, I think, in June or May, June. So she was only working part time. I was the one that was working full time. So it was just having those conversations in terms of like the majority of the money that I was earning was going on preparing everything for the wedding, and whatever my wife got was just an extra kind of bonus. I think it was only after we got married that we really kind of had those deeper conversations in terms of, right, okay, let's be intentional, with saving. Let's be intentional with, what we want to do, in terms of, we've always felt like we wanted to go away on holidays. So just being driven to set money aside, to be able to go away every year. And we've been able to do that because we've been intentional with that. And that's something that we've agreed on together. And even when we had kids, they came on holiday with us. So it became a larger conversation. I think once we got to that place where we had married, we were in our council flat at the time, and it was like, right, okay, let's really talk about that. But I think leading up to that, it was more just a case of let's just find out what things cost and let's just pay for those things.
Hindsight, right, is 2020. So like later on into marriage, is there conversations that you think you could have benefited from
Oh,
having
100%.
before getting married?
100%. 100%. I think, you know, I mean, this is my personal perspective, but I think we do a lot as a church around, giving, whether that's tithing, whether that's giving in offerings and things like that. But I don't think we're doing enough to equip people to be able to give. And that comes from laying that foundation of being able to equip people to save or invest or manage their finances. And I think one of the biggest shocks for me was sending my kids to uni. I mean, it was like, why didn't anyone tell me that it was going to cost this much? And we're not just talking about university fees, we're talking about maintenance allowance, we're talking about giving them, money on top of that to be able to just simply survive. I wish I'd had those conversations because I think I probably would have saved a lot more, or at least been more, uh, what's the word? More driven with my finance in terms of that perspective.
Amazing.
Because we
That's really
wanted to, we
interesting.
had those conversations and we wanted to send our kids to uni, but nobody really sits down and tells you this is what it's going to cost, this is what it entails. By the way, if there's a shortfall in the maintenance allowance, you've got to make that shortfall up, and also provide them finances to be able to eat and live. And it's like, well, how much is that? And it's not a small amount.
Yeah, I can imagine. Gosh, university was expensive when I went many moons ago, so I can imagine now accommodation costs, food, except everything is so expensive, right? Even for us that are not that are not students, talk less how much it must be for university students, and then the parents that have to make up the shortfalls for them because yeah, a lot of times you don't want them to necessarily work because you need to concentrate on your studies. So it's like financing that is yeah, I can imagine it being a lot. And it's so interesting. Yeah, it's such an interesting one because we think about, or I think about the costs of raising kids, but in the younger years, I think those are the kind of conversations that we had early on. Is like, okay, what kind of school do we want them to go to in terms of secondary school area
Yes.
that we want to live in and those kind of things, what kind of activities we want them to do. But I hadn't even thought that far into the future in terms of them now going to university. So it's so interesting that you're sharing that now because it's now making me think actually it's so true because I'm thinking, wow, yeah, it's not long before my eldest is probably going to be at university age because he's what 11 now, soon to be 12. But you're going to blink and he's going to be 18, and then I'm going to be in that position where I'm having to fork out all this money for university fees, etc. So it's true what you're saying. It's like we need that information earlier on so that we can plan and prepare ahead for it, because yeah, that time, once it comes, you can't now go back over the next, you
Right.
can't make up the shortfall for the last 10
No.
years, if that makes
Yes,
sense.
yeah.
So it's like, yeah, we need to put things in motion now to prepare for that time.
Yeah.
I think it's equally the same when it comes to even considering things like retirement. I was having a conversation with a friend the other day about retirement. I know I've still got a while to go until retirement, but then at the same time, we were having these conversations about, okay, but what are we going to do in retirement? If we're saying we're going to be staying at home with our kids for this number of years, then that means we're not getting a pension contribution from my employer. So then what does that look like? And it's just all of these kind of conversations that, yeah, we need to know, and these kind of things we need to learn now so that
Yeah,
we
no,
can prepare
definitely.
for
Because
that
at
time
one
when
point,
that time comes.
at one point we had two kids at uni at the same time. So that's double the cost. So yeah, just having that conversation with somebody early on, because we wanted to send our kids to uni. It was something that we talked about, something that we discussed. My wife had gone to university, and so for us, it was like, yeah, this is what we want to do. But there is a financial cost attached to that, and it's just, even if you're just setting aside a little every month just to support that, it's not to say you set aside the whole amount, but at least something to fall back on.
And to that point, actually, just to know about in terms of financial planning and goal setting together as a couple, then where do you stand on that? And like, how important do you think it is for couples to have joint financial goals, or like some kind of financial vision that they're working towards?
No, I think it's really important. I think just sitting down, having those conversations. We were quite fortunate to purchase our first house many years ago, and how that came about was just a miracle in and of itself, anyway. But just sitting down and speaking about just having the finances to pay the mortgage, setting aside the finances to be able to go away. And I think in the early years of marriage, we weren't really driven about paying off the mortgage or even making overpayments. It was more just having a lifestyle that we wanted to live, which was go away each year, have a holiday, as husband and wife, and then have a holiday when the kids came along. And as I said, because we were so driven by that factor of being able to spend quality time as a family away, and creating a bond with between myself and my wife, and then when the kids came along with the kids, it just happened, where it was like, right, how much money have we set aside? How much money have we got now? Okay, what can we afford? What we can't afford? And I think it's learning to live within your means, so not buying stuff you can't afford, and then having those conversations about the things that maybe you want to buy, but there's going to be a finance agreement, as an example. So having that discussion together to say, okay, we don't have the cash at the moment to get this or to get that. Let's talk about the finance. Let's see how we're going to do that. And then the agreement is, if it's 6 months interest free or 3 months interest free, is paid off within that period. And that is something that we've done like religiously. It's whenever there's been something that's come up unexpectedly, it's like, okay, this is what we're going to do, and it's 3 months or it's 6 months.
How you navigate then providing for your family without letting money become a source of constant stress?
Wow, do you know what? That's a really good question. I think for us, we've just made the decision that money isn't the be all and end all. I think for us, it was just, do we have a roof over our head? Do our kids have clothes, and do they eat food? And I think, there's been times where things have really been tight financially. We've had to just make ends meet. Couple of times where, maybe I've even gone into overdraft just to try and make things happen, make things work. But you're doing all of those choices and decisions intentionally to say, right, okay, this is how I'm going to recover. This is how I'm going to get back to where I was. Or, so there was a year where that happened, and it was like, right, we've gone into overdraft, not a good situation to be in. But I think by the end of January, it was the overdraft was paid off, and everything else was, and that was because we were very intentional. So I'm not saying you should go into overdraft, but when things happen, it's just about being intentional with how you manage your finances thereon. So I think for us, it's just coming to that place that money isn't everything. Yeah, it's nice to have money. Don't get me wrong, we have a house, we have a mortgage, our kids have gone to uni, all three of them. But that's because we've been very intentional with how we've managed our finances and what we've done with our finances. So we never buy anything that we don't need. It's always, is this not, sorry, not need, want. It's always weighing it up. Is this a want or is this a need? And if it's a need, okay, fine, we need to buy that. But if it's a want, it's kind of like, well, when we have the money, we'll buy it. But if not, it's neither here or there.
Okay, now that's good. No, that's really good. So then, in terms of financial conflict, or not even conflict, but in terms of, for example, let's say you want to go on a holiday to X location, but maybe wife wants a new car. How do you navigate those kind of differences in opinions, or wanting to having not a misalignment, but you know what I mean, in terms of maybe having different point of views or different things that you want to prioritize financially? How do you navigate that? Would you say?
Yeah,
And
you
any
know what?
advice to couples?
I think there's it's kind of one of those situations again of like, if, for example, my car was to break down tomorrow and it got written off, it's like, right, okay, that money that we've set aside to go away this year is going to have to go on the car. That's a non-negotiable. We need the car. There's just, it's just, yeah, we can't survive without one. Um, just to drive to church, it takes us under an hour. So imagine what it's going to take on public transport. And, we've still got kids in the house. So it's just not going to work. So I think, there's certain decisions where it just simply comes down to that need process of what is the greatest need. And for us, that would have been the greatest need, that it would have been the car. And then, if we can recover and go. And the thing is, when we talk about holidays, you can do a UK break. One of the things that we did as a family was, and I say it as if it was a holiday, but we went to Seven Oaks. We just checked into a Holiday Inn, and it was a hotel that had a jacuzzi, a swimming pool, a spa, and the kids loved it. And we would check in on a Thursday, check out on a Saturday or a Sunday, and the kids were happy with that because they got to have their time and we got to have our time. So sometimes that's the compromise. It's saying, right, okay, we might not be able to go overseas, but actually there's still UK breaks that we can do. Sometimes I go and visit my mum. That becomes a holiday because she lives in the southwest of England. It's just making those decisions. But I think the biggest conflict in marriage can often be finances and money. And I think a lot of that stems from secrecy. It comes from a place of not being open and transparent with what you're spending your money on, or even kind of what's coming in. So my wife and I know what each other has. It's as simple as that.
You've been pastoring for a number of years now, right? So you've probably counseled many couples for various reasons, right? What would you say is one of the most common disagreements that maybe arise in marriage with married couples that you could potentially share and then give advice as to how to avoid entering into those same issues or experiencing those same issues?
I think it always comes down to one couple, or one part of the couple, one half of the couple is really willing to work at things and the other half isn't. And oftentimes that may be because of a hurt, or they've been let down, or a failure on the other person's half. And I think it's just getting people to that place where they realize that the only way they can move forward is if they're both on sort of walking with the same foot, or leading with the same foot. So just getting them to that place where it's like, look, okay, it's okay to disagree. I'm not saying you can't disagree. Disagreements are good because it means that you're not always going to be seeing eye to eye, but it's about how you can neutrally compromise about those disagreements and move forward, and then not resent that person for it, or uh hold it against them in that sense, and then use it as an emission. So it's just having those conversations with those couples to say, look, you've got to both come to that place where you want to work at it, where you want to invest into your relationship, your marriage, and you want to move forward. And if one couple, if one half of that couple turns around and says, well, I'm not, it becomes a very different conversation, because now you're dealing with somebody who really doesn't want to work at it for whatever reason. And then you've got to try and resolve that issue, and work with that individual to kind of get them to that place where they do. And if that never happened, then that's where the breakdown begins, because you really do have to collectively work together, and let go of things that maybe have hurt you. So if there's things that you're generally upset about, generally been hurt by, again, having that transparency, having that open, honest conversation, say what you did hurt me, what you said hurt me. I know I don't know. And the thing is, we think that forgiving equals forgetting, and that's not always the case. You're not necessarily going to forget what happened, and Christ doesn't call you to forget. He does call you to forgive, and it's coming to that place to say, I'm going to forgive you. And as you walk in that forgiveness, because again, things are going to happen, and no doubt the same behavior, or the same issue arises. You've just got to say, no, I've made that decision to forgive. And at some point you might find that you do forget. If that doesn't happen, you just keep forgiving.
So then, what would you say then, in your expertise, as someone's been married nearly 3 decades, would you say is the key to a lasting, successful marriage?
Wow, that's hard to summarize.
Yeah, if you could give me three
I don't
top
even know if
things.
I can give you three. I think
Yeah.
I think the first one is what I said earlier.
Christ, yeah.
Yeah, and I think for me it was very clear to see that, for my wife it was very clear for her to see that I loved Christ, and it was very clear for me to see that she loved Christ. Um, my warning to most people out there, if I'm going to give you a warning, is that person being in church and going to church isn't enough to say they're marriage material. I think sometimes we fall into this trap. Well, because they're in church or because they go to church, then that means that they're a Christian. And it's like, well, no, you've got to look at their life. You've got to look at their character. You've got to look at how they're living. And if that's expressing Christ likeness, then that's fine. But I think sometimes people make decisions solely based on the fact, well, they're in church, so it's going to work. And it's like, well, that's not what makes a marriage. Just because that person's, because if that was the case, we wouldn't have the 20. I think it's 28% of marriages in Christianity end in divorce. If going to church was enough, we wouldn't see that statistic.
That's true.
Um, and then I think that the other thing that we've lived by, not to say that we've been perfect, is the Bible says, "Don't let the sun go down on your wrath or your anger." So just never allowing things to kind of seep into the following day. And that doesn't mean that that's not happened, but making sure that you try to resolve things as quickly as you can if that has happened, because the longer you leave that unresolved, the harder it gets, the more stubborn you become. It's just deal with it. Just whatever you need to do to work it out. Say sorry. Just don't let the sun go down in your wrath.
That's good. That's good. Do I need one more? No, you've given me three, I think. Yeah, okay. So have Christ as the foundation, make sure the person has good character. They're not just a Christian in terms of attending church, but
Yeah.
actually they have good character. And then the third one is forgive quickly. So then just going back to the character one, I just wanted to give some more insight or more help to, I guess, people that are listening in right now that maybe are in that boat where they are courting somebody or being courted or considering somebody as a potential spouse. What are the kind of character traits would you say make somebody wife material, husband material?
I think first of all, it's just watching how they are with other people. How do they interact with other people? Are they quick to lose their temper? Are they quick to fly off the handle? How are they in terms of dealing with conflict? Because no doubt that's happened in church where you've seen a situation between two brothers or two sisters, or between a brother and a sister in church. How they manage that conflict, how they resolve that conflict. And then just outside of that, just do they desire to want to have a relationship with God? Is that what they're pursuing? But just looking for those things, I think for me, m- what I saw in my wife was the kind of she was coming to church, she was praying, she wasn't just talking to people in church. She really made a point of going to the prayer room first, and then afterwards talking with people, and that was also after church. Whenever we were at fellowships, I could see her interacting and engaging with people. So again, she wasn't just keeping herself to herself, isolating herself. Whenever I was at Usher at the time, so I know this sounds a little bit extreme, but I'd be watching her in worship. Is this somebody who's really
I can see how that can sound a bit like, okay, just watching her praise God,
yeah.
but no.
How genuine is it? How heartfelt is it? Just because I think if you're in that position where you do kind of look around in church, you can really see who's kind of engaged and who's connecting and who's really kind of worshiping and who's just doing it because that's the song that we're singing. So it's just looking for those characteristics, those genuine characteristics of, just compassion, being able to engage with other people, building relationships, and I think that's what's really helped with us, because when we went out to pioneer in Bexley Heath, my wife was the one that was having conversations with people in the streets. You know, I was the one that was struggling, but it was just so natural for her. And that was what I saw in her before I even got married.
So I've got a question, and it's a bit off script, but it's just something that came to my head, and I just
Sure.
wanted to get your perspective and what you think on it. But I hear people talk often about believing in the one and that person being the one for them, and I just wanted to know where you stand on that and what your view is on that whole concept of somebody being the one.
I don't think there is the one. I think anyone can be the one. But again, it's kind of bringing that back to the, you know, what are you looking for in an individual personally, but then also kind of lining that up to what the Bible says they should be in terms of their character and how they live and how they act, and how how their relationship with God. So I think for me, if you've got five people that are doing that and five people that match that criteria, it's kind of really down to which one are you the most attracted to, because attraction has to play a part in this. We can't just exclude that from that equation. No, you've got to be attracted to that individual, and at some point that attraction has to go beyond just being simply physical, because that might be the first thing that attracts you to somebody, the physical appearance of that person. And then as you get to know that person, and I think that's where the whole getting to know somebody becomes very important, in terms of not rushing that, and really getting to know that individual personally, in terms of what's their belief systems, what things do they value, what things do they love, what things do they what things don't they love, um because then you're on the grounds of compatibility, and it might be that you're physically attracted to somebody but then find that you're just not compatible, because you're so far extreme. And so it's, attraction has something to do with it, but it's then building off of that and saying, well, what else about that person attracts you, about their personality, how they are with other people, what is it on top of that additionally.
Because I have another question, so I'm just literally seizing the
No,
opportunity
that's
to
fine.
ask you all of these questions. I believe that it will be really helpful to some of our listeners, particularly the younger ones that are considering marriage and considering getting into relationships. I think there's a lot of conversations that you hear online that are not the most helpful, I think, in terms of people moving forward with relationships. So, for example, on a lot of podcasts, you might hear conversations about like who should pay on the first date, or if he's not spending this much amount on the first date, then he's not the one, and all of those conversations. But I feel like there's so much more depth and more deeper conversations that people should be having, or more questions that people should be asking at dates that will be more telling than those kind of conversations. So I just wanted to get your advice or get your suggestions on kind of questions. So, like, for example, a young lady, she's 23 or 24, and she's going on a first date with a guy, and what kind of questions she should be asking that guy in those initial dates.
I think if it's the first date, I think it really is about just getting to know each other, isn't it? It's about working out whether, okay, I've been attracted to this individual, whatever it was that attracted you to that individual, to say, hey, listen, I'd like to get to know you, I'd like to take you out on a date. And hopefully it's the guy that's done that, not the but we won't go too much into that. But
Let's
you
hope so, yeah.
I think it's just about simply getting to know each other more personally. What things do you like? What music do you listen to? Where do you like to go on holiday? Where do you see yourself in? You know, or what would be your ideal job? But just things that help you get to know that person. Their background, things like that. Just building that knowledge of who that person is. Having those conversations. And first date conversations is very hard, because you're really at that embryo stage of getting to know each other. So it doesn't need to be too deep, but at the same time, as long as you're kind of putting the feeler out there to say, is this somebody that I'm compatible with? How's the conversation? And the thing is, in that kind of a situation, if the conversation is just flowing, then it will just happen organically. Whereas if you're having to force issues and force conversation, you've got to kind of take a step back and say, well, okay, is this me or is this them? Is this something that we need to just work out? Because again, it could just be first date um nerves, So yeah, but just I think the desire ultimately is get to know that person outside of church and in an environment where you can have conversations where you can go a bit more personal and a bit more intimate in terms of what you talk about.
Okay, that's good. But no pressure for him to spend £500 on the first date.
No, because again, that's not really a reflection of that individual as a person. Just because you have money doesn't mean that that person's compatible, or that you're going to get on with that person, or that's even going to be a good foundation for your relationship. Because it might create uh, a false kind of perception of that individual, that no matter what the situation is, money's the answer, or money's the solution, and you're creating that by just saying, "Oh, I'll buy you this, or I'll buy you that, or I'll spend this, or I'll spend that." There's some things money can't answer. There's some things money doesn't have an answer for. And it's kind of understanding very early on that that shouldn't be the driver. That shouldn't be the thing that you're focused on the most. Is he earning money? Great. It doesn't really matter look, I mean, uh, does the guy have a job? I mean, that's the first question. And then outside of that, it's kind of what are you doing? Once you've got to that stage where you're talking about getting married and making the relationship more serious, now the conversation needs to be about where are you living? Do you have a plan to get out of your mum's house or your aunt's house or your brother's house, or wherever it is that you are? Is there a plan? Is there a strategy? Because my advice to any person that's planning to get married is the worst foundation that you can ever build on is living with the in-laws. My advice to you would be to rent for at least the first year of your marriage and then go live with the in-laws.
Yes. It's so
Um,
interesting you said that because that's literally what we ended up doing. Yeah,
yeah,
we
because
rented for
because
about 2 years.
yeah, and that period has to be used intentionally. It's not just you living rent free in your mum's house so you can do whatever you want and buy the Mercedes or whatever. It's no, we're setting that money aside for a deposit. This is how much we need, and this is how long it's going to take if we save X amount each month. And so you've literally drawn out a plan to say this is how long we're going to be in this situation for. It's not something that's just going to keep rolling on because Gucci bag here, holiday here, and then before you know it, you reach the end of 3, 4, 5 years, and you've only saved 10,000. That shouldn't be the case if you're both earning a salary, or even if one person's earning a salary. You should have saved more than that.
No, that's good. That's really good. Gosh, so many gems you've dropped in this conversation, Pastor. Thank you so much. I know people listening in are going to hopefully be taking notes. And if you haven't taken notes, guys, definitely go back and listen and take notes because it's been very, very helpful. But before I let you go, Pastor, I just wanted to speak a little bit more about your book that you mentioned at the beginning of the episode. So you've got a new book called Money Works, which is coming out. Money Works, Marriage Works. Forgive, It's
That's fine.
Marriage Works, and it's coming out when? When is it going to
It
be
was out
released?
on Saturday, the 31st of January, so it's out now as a Kindle and as a paperback.
Amazing. So on what platforms? It's available across all platforms?
Yeah, pretty much any kind of good bookstore. So Amazon's a good one to go to. You can download it as a Kindle. You can purchase it as a paperback. I believe it's on Barnes and Noble. It's on uh, Good News Bookshop. Pretty much most platforms.
Amazing, amazing. And just before we go, then I just want to touch on one of the chapters that you said you've got in the book where you talk about money and money matters in marriage. And I just
Yes.
wanted you to tell us a little bit, give us a bit of a spoiler into that section of the book, and basically not sell the book, but basically give people
Yeah.
a bit of
No.
insight as to
So
why it's going to be a good one for them to pick up.
it's spread over two chapters. So there's part one and part two. And part one is just the whole kind of having those conversations about where you're at financially as an individual and not having secrets. So, if there is debt in your life, which there was for me as a single guy, I was renting off the council. I'd managed to get myself into some debt. I think it was like £2,500 in arrears. And we had conversations about that, because that's going to impact us. That's going to affect us. It's going to affect possibly the future, unless we look at what we can do to kind of deal with that. And so, by the grace of God, I was able to pay that off and move forward. So having those open, honest conversations about your finances, not having any financial secrets from each other, you know, especially as I said, when it comes to debt or loans, things like that. And then the second chapter is more just about being intentional with using your money. Money is something that we can use. It's something that we can put to work, and it's looking at the best ways that you can do that where you're in agreement. So there was a time when my wife wasn't working and she took up Mary Kay, and it was like, okay, right, we'll support that, and we'll do what we need to do to help her do that. And she did very good at that. Then she wanted to become a registered childminder. Okay, what's that going to involve? So sometimes you make sacrifices financially to pay for certain things, whether it's a course or whether it's training. But just making those decisions, because they're investments. Whether you see that as an investment or not, it's still an investment, because there's knowledge you're learning, there's training you're learning, there's education, there's qualification. So even with my first book, we sat down, we talked about it, and it cost a little bit of money to get the cover design. It cost a little bit of money to get it proofread. We sat down, we talked about how much that would cost, and we agreed that, yeah, okay, fine, we're going to set some money aside to do that. So having those conversations, because again, there's things that we can be investing in, and I think we're becoming a lot more intentional now in terms of just investing our money, saving our money, setting money aside, using budget planners to kind of see what's coming in, what's going out. Do I have a handle on all of that? Why is that not looking the way it should do? And so the book talks about that, and encourages people to kind of learn how to budget, learn how to manage their finances. Because if we really want to be able to give in whatever arena that is, because I really think that giving's a lifestyle. It's not just about giving to church. It's just giving naturally out of that place of just wanting to be a blessing to people. What's going to get you to that place is you learning how to manage your resources, your finances, um, so that it doesn't become too cumbersome when you go out and it's like, who's going to pay, and you're looking at the other person. I want it to be that no one ever pays for me. I don't mind if people want to bless me, but my mindset and mentality is I want to be a blessing first. And I've had fights with people over who's going to be paying, where we've got to the card machine and it's like my card, his card, their card, and it's like, no, I want to be a blessing. Don't rob me of being a blessing.
Oh, I love that. Gosh, I need to get some new friends. No, that's good. That's really good. Okay, then before you go, then I've got one final question for you, and then yeah, I guess we can wrap things up. So I think the final question that I have is for a younger Pastor Leighton. So I guess this will be Leighton before he was the pastor. If you could go back and talk to 22-year-old Leighton who's about to get married, what's one piece of advice that you would have given him?
Wow. Probably that one that I talked about, just being, I think for me, just that financial knowledge that I've learned over the years of going, as I said, into overdraft, building up a little bit of a debt when I was living in a council flat, just having somebody sit down and say, this is how you effectively manage your money. This is what it looks like. Because I think for a lot of people, they're being told, oh, just manage your finances. Just if you just learn how to manage your finances. But the thing is, are you even giving them tools to be able to do that? What tools are you giving them? Are you supporting them through that? Are you challenging them or revisiting it a month later and saying, how's that going? Having those conversations. And I think if we held each other more accountable to those things, we would become better stewards of our finances. I think because money's such a big taboo, nobody really wants to say what they're earning. And I get that. And I'm not asking you what you're earning. I'm asking you, what are you doing with your finances and how are you managing it? And if I had that conversation earlier on, I think it would have helped me so much.
Amazing. That's good. That was really good. Okay, so well, come to the end of the show now. Thank you so much, Pastor, for coming on.
No,
Do you have
thank you
any
for having
final
me.
closing words or any piece of advice or one final tip, I guess, for our listeners listening that they can take away from the hundreds of things you've already shared?
If you're planning to get married, really sit down and look at yourself. So do a self-assessment. As a Christian, where am I in my walk with God? Do I have a relationship with Christ that is able to sustain a relationship? That doesn't mean that you're perfect. It doesn't mean that you've worked out all the kinks and the issues in your life, but at least getting yourself to a place where you're spiritually mature enough to be able to have a relationship with somebody, and start from there, because when you come into a relationship, you're bringing yourself with you. And it's not about being fake, and it's not about trying to be something you're not. I think for both myself and my wife, we're just our genuine selves. And I think one of the biggest compliments we ever get is just like, you're just you. I'm not something when I'm behind the pulpit, and I'm something else when I'm not. And I'm not something else when I'm with my wife, and I'm not something else when I'm not. It's kind of like just being congruent and being the same throughout. And I think for me, yeah, that's what's helped us the most.
No, thank you so much, Pastor, for coming on today. It's been a really, really good conversation. I've definitely taken a lot from it. Like selfishly, I've learned a lot from this episode. So I really appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on, and thanks for tuning in, guys. And I will catch you on the next one.